Hello there. My name's Mark Street, and I've been actively involved in the aviation industry for over 20 years. I thought it's time to give an insight to the exciting world of aviation. I started my aviation career 21 years ago after climbing a ladder as a scientist. I would often look up at the skies during my lunch breaks and imagine myself flying those marvellous looking aluminium tubes. It amazed me, and still does, on how on earth those 200-ton pieces of metal managed to fly almost effortlessly. After a short stint in general aviation, I started working for the airlines, with a regional operator flying turboprop aircraft. Later, I ventured onto Boeing 737s and then back to the turboprops. If you speak to enough pilots, they will tell you a different journey they undertook. But what we pilots all share is our stories of trials and tribulations, but also our love of flying. There's no other feeling in the world that I have at least experienced that matches the freedom of taking to the skies. In this podcast series, I hope to share with you aviation conspiracy stories, aircraft systems, how planes fly, aviation medicine and physiology, human factors, various types of aircraft, technology advances, travel destinations, airports, life as a pilot and as a career, along with much, much more. I'll also be asking listeners for all your input as to topics you'd like me to explore. And finally, hopefully interview active members of the aviation industry for their professional and valuable insight. I hope to deliver the podcast on a fortnightly basis. So let's begin this podcast series with our first topic of some of the wackiest incidents in aviation. Let's go back to 1947. An American Airlines DC-4 departed New York for Los Angeles. The flight made a scheduled stop in Dallas, Texas, where another company captain, sitting in the observer's seat, switched seats with the current operating captain to continue the flight to Los Angeles. The aircraft departed normally and entered cruise at 8,000 feet. A short time thereafter, approximately 35 miles east of El Paso, the aircraft began to slowly climb. The captain attempted to correct the climb by using what's called elevator trims. Trim tabs are small metal surfaces normally attached to the end of control surfaces such as ailerons, rudders or elevators. The purpose of these trim tabs are to counteract the force of the control surface it's attached to so as to eliminate the operator from constantly applying force. I will explain in more detail the aerodynamics of flight in another podcast. But for now, let's stick with the basics. Ailerons roll the aircraft left and right. Rudders yaws the aircraft left and right. And elevators allow the aircraft to move up and down vertically. So back to the incident. The captain applied nose forward trim to counteract the climb. However, this had no effect on the climbing attitude, and the aircraft continued to climb. Unbeknownst to either the captain or the first officer, the observing captain had attempted to play a prank on the operating crew by locking the gust lock. The gust lock is used on the ground to prevent the control surfaces I was talking about from moving, particularly during windy conditions. It is to be released during flight. The captain finally realised that the gust lock was on and released it. Unfortunately, the elevator trim hadn't been reset back to its neutral position, and the aircraft entered a severe nosedive towards the ground. What made things worse was the fact that neither the prankster captain sitting in the observer seat nor the operating captain had their seatbelts on at the time. As a result of the nosedive, both these pilots' heads impacted the aircraft's propeller levers, which resulted in feathering 3 of the 4 propellers. Again, I'll talk about what propeller feathering is in another podcast. However, what this meant for this particular incident was that the thrust of the 3 of the 4 propellers was significantly reduced. Thankfully, the first officer was able to recover the dive at 300 feet above the ground, unfeather the 3 propellers, and return safely to land at El Paso. So what happened to the captain that decided to play a prank? Well, that's for another podcast of Where Are They Now? Still in America, in 2021, a lady was met by airport security after an in-flight incident involving a hairless cat. Delta Flight 1360 was operating from New York to Atlanta when a flight attendant observed a lady sitting in 13 Alpha breastfeeding. Sounds normal enough, right? Except the lady wasn't breastfeeding a baby. She was attempting to breastfeed her hairless feline. After several complaints from nearby passengers, a flight attendant requested the wet nurse place the cat back into its cage. The lady declined the offer and continued to express milk to her cat. Flight crew were advised and sent a message via their flight computers, also known as ACARs, that read, "Request red coat meet at aircraft. Passenger in 13A is breastfeeding a cat and will not put back into carrier when flight attendant requested." In 2014, an American man flying from New York to Hong Kong with Cathay Pacific Airlines was forced to fly for 14 of the 15-hour journey in the lavatory. Approximately 1 hour into the long-haul flight, the male passenger visited the lavatory and after attempting to rid of some rubbish, his middle finger became lodged in the lavatory rubbish bin. Several attempts were made to aid in the expulsion of his phalange from the rubbish bin, but with no such luck. And so the passenger made himself comfortable for the next 14 hours and landed in Hong Kong without incident, where firefighters freed him and his finger from the aircraft toilet. I think I'll hold on next time I fly. In 2017, a photo of a passenger plane full of falcons went viral. The Saudi Arabian flight was carrying the birds of prey to aid in the hunt for geese. Even today, a number of airlines offer special permission to carry birds. For example, Qatar Airways has a current policy of only 1 falcon per passenger is allowed to be carried in the economy class cabin. A maximum of 6 falcons only, passenger cabin, economy class, can be accepted on any Qatar Airways flight. In 2008, a Ryanair flight that departed Budapest bound for Dublin diverted to Frankfurt due to the leakage of mushrooms. A passenger loaded an open jar of mushrooms in one of the overhead lockers. Unfortunately for one of the passengers, he had an allergy to various allergens, including mushrooms. It's thought that some of the oil leaked from the jar into the air conditioning system. The affected passenger started to display symptoms associated with anaphylaxis. His throat began to constrict. Thankfully, the flight diverted to Frankfurt, where paramedics were waiting upon the aircraft's arrival and treated the man successfully. In 2012, a flight from Manchester to Palma was forced to divert to London Stansted due to one of the passengers deciding to set fire to one of his mate's hair mid-flight as part of a stag party prank. Passengers smelt smoke and crew alerted the flight crew, who opted to divert. The plane landed without further incident and the prankster was taken into custody. And as for his friend's hair, he sported a new hairstyle for his wedding. We aren't sure if the two are still mates. And finally, the last example of the wackiest incident in aviation occurred in 1990. British Airways 5390 departed Birmingham and through 17,000 feet, Captain Lancaster's window detached from the aircraft, resulting in a rapid decompression. Lancaster was partially sucked out of the aircraft. Fortunately for him, his feet snagged the control column, preventing him from completely being ejected. In the event, the autopilot disengaged, resulting in the aircraft entering a dive. Remarkably, one of the flight attendants managed to hold on to Lancaster's legs, preventing him from being dislodged, whilst the co-pilot, Alistair Atchison, brought the aircraft under control and landed safely. Miraculously, Lancaster survived with only minor injuries to his elbow, thumb and wrist, along with partial frostbite. Well, I hope you enjoyed this inaugural podcast of Winging It. Join us next time where we will discuss another fascinating topic on aviation. Until then, have a good day.